Hi, this is Marguerite Judson, Associate Rector at the Episcopal Church of St. Mary the Virgin. We're doing a series on the Book of Common Prayer, how to pray with the BCP. And today I want to talk to you about the Book of Psalms. We had this class in real time on June 21st, but had some technical problems and couldn't record it. So I am giving you the content and a summary of some of our discussion in today's video. The Book of Common Prayer contains the entire Book of Psalms, which is my favorite part of the Bible. It was composed over at least 5 centuries, from about 1000 before the Christian era to at least 500 BCE, which was after the return from the Babylonian exile. So we are sharing in prayers that are 3 millennia old, and poetry whose style is parallels, couplets that define or refine each other. Many of them are synonymous parallels. For example, in Psalm 27, it says, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid?" In other cases, the 2 lines are expressing opposites, known as antithetical parallelism. For example, in Psalm 78, we read, "And he led them in a cloud by day, and all night by a fiery light." We have no musical notations for the Psalms. However, a third of them are addressed to the lead player, or what we might call the director of music. And that's not reflected in the Book of Common Prayer. And we have some hint of the music, at least I take it as a hint when I've been to Bat Mitzvah and heard the young woman chanting the Torah. And I recognized how close those melodies are to our plain song chants. A bit of history about our Psalter. It's based largely on Miles Coverdale's translation. He was the first person to translate the Bible into English, and the Psalter was used in the 1554 Book of Common Prayer, it's rhythmically beautiful and easy to read or sing together. However, he was not translating from the Hebrew. He used the Vulgate, which is a Latin translation of the Septuagint, which is a translation into Greek of the original Hebrew in the 3rd century before the Christian era. So there were stopgap corrections to the text over 3 centuries and major revisions before the publication of the 1979 Book of Common Prayer. And one of the things you might have noticed in the Psalter in our Book of Common Prayer is that there are these Latin words next to the numbers. Those are the first few words in Latin of that psalm from the Vulgate. So we often say part of Psalm 95 in morning prayer. And so the opening words in English, "Come, let us sing," is "Venite exultemus" in Latin. So when you see that at the beginning of the Psalms, that's what that's from. That's from the Latin. The emphasis in the Book of Common Prayer is on the Psalter as a daily part of worship. It's deep in the monastic hours, during which the monks and nuns would read the whole psalm, the whole Psalter every week. It was condensed into the morning prayer and evening prayer, 7 monastic hours. And there are patterns to read the Psalms. There's 2 different patterns that are offered by the Book of Common Prayer. The whole Book of Common Prayer begins on page 585. The whole Book of Psalms begins on page 585. And if you look at that first psalm, above it says, "First Day Morning Prayer." So if you start reading the Psalms there, and it takes you through Psalm 5, and then on page 589 it says, "First Day Evening Prayer" for Psalm number 6. So if you want to read the Psalms over a 30-day period, those are your clues in the Book of Common Prayer for how to read them. There's also an option to savor them a bit more slowly. If you go to the Daily Lectionary, and the Daily Lectionary, we have 2 years. We have year 1 and year 2. And the way to figure out which year we're in is whether the year we're in for most of the church year is an even number. Remembering that the church year begins in Advent. So we're currently in 2020. So we're in year 2 of the Daily Lectionary, even though the church year began in 2019. Most of the year is in 2020, so we're in the year 2, the even number. And you'll notice that the psalm number is on the same line as the name of the day. So on page 937, if you look at Monday, it says 1, 2, 3, and then there's a little graphic of 4 dots that's a cue from the Book of Common Prayer that suggests you read Psalms 4 and 7 in the evening. And the next day on Tuesday, you read 5 and 6 in the morning, and 10 and 11 in the evening. So it's not exactly sequential, but it will take you through the entire book of Psalms in about 7 weeks. So if you wanted to pick up as of June 21st, you would go to page 973, because that's for the week of the Sunday closest to June 22nd. So you could pick up the Psalms there and read that way. Another option is to read 1 psalm per day, if you're doing only morning or evening prayer. If your quiet time is either just in the morning or just in the evening. So that's one way to do it. We'll talk about Psalm 119 a bit later, because it's got 22 stanzas, so don't try to read that all in one day. There are some different types of psalms, and they're fluid categories. The psalms are poetry and tend to jump fences, but I find it helpful to look at the type of psalm. This was originally categorized by Herman Gunkel. The first type of psalm is hymns of praise, and it's often about God's work in creation. So again, if we go back to Psalm 95, where we read excerpts in morning prayer, that is a hymn of praise. The second type of psalm is community lament. I think most vividly of Psalm 137, by the rivers of Babylon we sat down and wept. So that was written when the Jews were carried into the Babylonian exile. There are royal psalms as a third category. Those tend to be about battles and weddings and coronations. And what's interesting is no monarch is named in the psalm itself, but there are groups of psalms that are fitted for celebrating those milestones in a monarch's life. And then we get to the individual laments. And those tend to have some common characteristics. They address God by name. There's a complaint, which can be quite detailed. There's a request for help. And there's a promise of thanksgiving or words of praise in the psalm itself. The psalm we read on June 21st, Psalm 69, begins, "Save me, O God, for the waters have risen up to my neck." So we're clearly getting God is being addressed. There's a complaint, I'm about to drown, and the psalm goes on asking for help. You may be more familiar with Psalm 22, which we read on Good Friday, which is Jesus' words from the cross. That psalm begins, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And it is very vivid and eloquent about the suffering and the pain of the person who is saying that psalm and that Jesus is quoting. But what we may not realize is that that psalm gets to the place of praise and affirmation. The conclusion of the psalm says, "My soul shall live for God. My descendants shall serve him. They shall be known as the Lord's forever. They shall come and make known to a people yet unborn the saving deeds that God has done." So one of the things that gives me comfort in the Psalms of Lament is that they get to that place of affirmation without denying how hard it is. Then there's Psalms of individual thanksgiving as the final major category. Psalm 23 is a psalm of thanksgiving. One of my favorites is the beginning part of Psalm 139, verses 1 to 17, which starts out, Yahweh, you have searched me out and known me. You know my sitting down and my rising up. And it's a psalm that I find particularly comforting and reassuring these days. Some of the psalms in the individual thanksgivings are what we would call wisdom literature, and now I'll get back to Psalm 119. It's the most alien from our contemporary European culture because it comes from the wisdom literatures. It comes from a time when proverbs were recognized and cultivated, and it's a mnemonic poem. It has 22 stanzas because there are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet, and each stanza begins with the same letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So it's a way to help you remember when you're reciting it in Hebrew. And it's extolling the Torah, the law of God, which is certainly more inspiring than what I think of when I think of somebody who's fixed on Proverbs. And I think of Polonius's hackneyed phrases in the play Hamlet. So I find Psalm 119 one where there's a cultural chasm in what we're used to doing. I think it's really important that the majority of psalms are psalms of lament or supplication. We have a lot of company when we're complaining to the Holy One about our individual experience or our corporate experience. But lament is itself a strong expression of faith because we're lamenting to one we know is listening and someone we know cares about us. And I think of the importance of the words of an abbot from a Benedictine monastery I used to go to on retreat when I was in college. And in that monastery, they read the book of Psalms, every week. Again, they're doing the 7 hours, monastic hours, so they would go through the entire book of Psalms. And he pointed out that we're praying with the community of faith across time and space. So if the appointed psalm reflects different emotions than we're feeling, we pray it with those who feel those emotions right now, even if we don't. Because we're entering into other people's joy or lament or sorrow or delight, as they will enter into ours when they read a psalm that they don't feel, but it's what we're feeling. So in the original class, we then started talking about what are our favorite psalms and why. And a few things from that discussion. Psalm 23 was mentioned. It's the most familiar to many people. For many Episcopalians, if they've memorized a psalm, it's probably Psalm 23. Someone else talked about Psalm number 1, which was memorized in Sunday school in the Presbyterian Church. And I think when we memorize a psalm, those words can come up and comfort us and reassure us and give us a framework of faith for what we're going through. And my favorite portion of Psalm 139 points for me to the benefit of reading alternate translations. In the Book of Common Prayer, verses 13 to 14 says, "If I say, surely the darkness will cover me, and the light around me turn to night. Darkness is not dark to you. The night is as bright as the day. Darkness and light to you are both alike." And one of my favorite Hebrew scholars and commentators is Robert Alter, who translates those verses as, "Should I say, yes, the darkness will swathe me, and the night will be light for me. Darkness itself will not darken for you, and the night will light up like the day. The dark and the light will be one." So for me, I encourage you that as you find psalms that deeply resonate for you, read them repeatedly. Don't be afraid to keep using them on a daily basis. And compare different translations. You might consider exploring Robert Alter's book, The Art of Biblical Poetry. And savor the fact that you are praying with siblings in the faith from 3 millennia ago. Whatever it is you're feeling, people of our faith have felt it and share it with you. And they are testifying that God is faithful and will be with us whatever we go through. I hope that you enjoy the book of Psalms. I hope you dig into it and let it feed you and hold you and nurture you. Thank you.